Hello.
Hey, Greg.
What's up, sir?
Hey, Greg, it's Josh over at 1-800-VJJ Help. Thanks for
What's
coming
going on,
on.
John?
Yeah, just calling. We needed your help today. We're studying a lot of your work over the past months, and we wanted to dive deep into the topic of invariance today. So, yeah, excited to
Sounds
have you
good,
on.
man. Excited to be on. Hope I can help.
Awesome. So, yeah, to start with a really basic question, what is jujitsu and what is the game that we play?
Jiu-jitsu is the way we organize around the idea of immobilization as it leads to strangulation and breaking. So we play the game of grappling, which basically means it's a tactical game where we use grappling tactics or gripping tactics by using our entire body to hold our partner down so we can hold them still and get a hold of their neck and strangle it, or get a hold of their arms or legs and break them. Now, jiu-jitsu itself is a philosophy that guides this process. And the way I like to describe it is it's a philosophy of unevenness. So the idea is that I use more of my body against less of yours to gain a mechanical, strategic, or tactical advantage.
Perfect. And then can you talk about the global invariance, this idea of playing the game of immobilization as it leads to strangulation and breaking?
Yeah, for sure. So when we think about how difficult it would be to even start teaching this game, we'd have to ask ourselves the basic question. If I had a room and I had to start people playing this game, what do I teach? How do I know what to tell people what to do to get them to start playing this game? And through um, looking at human behavior and human movement and coming across a specific scientific framework, I found this thing called invariants. So invariants are things that humans organize around, things that don't change in the environment to produce behavior largely. That's, I guess, an easy way to talk about it. So the idea is that we want to use this idea of invariance to look at the game of grappling so we can guide ourselves or the students we're teaching into learning how to play the game or improve how we play the game.
And why these specific words, immobilization as it leads to strangulation and breaking? It seems very, very thought out.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So we have to define why we take action. And so we have to know the effect that we're trying to have over our opponent. We don't move in a vacuum. The way we move is relative to the context in which we do it. So we have to know why we are moving against another body. So again, what are we effectively trying to do? And we know there's a relationship with things that don't move and things that break. So essentially, again, all our actions are going towards holding someone still so they become more strangleable or more breakable, or we're resisting that. And so knowing that can help us guide our learning or the learning of our students.
Yeah, at the Eco Palooza, you mentioned that even the basic concept of gripping someone, you're already beginning to immobilize them in some
For
way.
sure. Well, an interesting way to think about it is actually the first way we start to immobilize someone is actually just getting closer to them. So if we think about the idea of holding a body still, we're actually using two surfaces. So we're using the surface of our own body as a way to cut off paths for the other body to move, and then we have the floor. So imagine the most immobilization we can add to our partner is to sandwich them between us and the floor. And so we go through a series of movements to try to achieve this end or something that looks like it. And connecting or the gripping mechanism is the first way, once we get close enough to do that, to start this process. So a wrist that's gripped makes that whole system less mobile than it otherwise would be.
Right. And that's where we kind of get into how do we immobilize? It's by, in your words, attacking the periphery to gain access to center mass to then re-attack the periphery. This
For
also
sure.
seems like a very carefully set of chosen words. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So when we watch grappling in its historical context, like if we watch grappling from the first time we ever had it on film until now, we'll see these patterns repeating over and over and over and over again. And it tells us something about the nature of the human body itself. Because if I'm an acting agent acting against another body, I'm going to have to do things to that body to weaken it relative to the game that we play. And so what we see is that the weak parts of the body are the things that can't defend itself. So the hips, chest, shoulders, and back. There's basically it's a big chunk of meat in the middle of your body. And the way that we protect it is by orienting the structures that stick out from it. So our head, our arms, and our legs. So when someone wants to come grab a hold of me to stop me from moving and slam me down on the floor, it has to get past the things that protect it. So we attack the things that protect it. We call this the periphery. These are just the things that stick out, the head, arms, and legs. Now, center mass is that thing that we want. It's that contact point that if we make contact with, we close our hands around it, we gain a great level of control over where our partner moves. And we can use that control to take the standing player off of their feet and put them on the ground to enhance the control we're trying to impose as it relates to trying to hold them still, trying to reach our end of immobilization, strangulation, and breaking. So that's why I chose that language, because I feel like it describes that well.
It does, yeah. And then from there, the how we do that is you mentioned make and maintain connections for the purpose of managing distance. Can you dive into that a bit?
For sure. So we can't even start to move each other around unless we make connections to each other. So first we have to be able to make connections. And connections could be as simple as, putting my hand on somebody's hand or putting my hand on somebody's body. That initial level of connection will start to allow me to do things with that distance. If I'm resisting being immobilized, I want to create some distance so I have space to move within. If I'm trying to impose immobilization, then I need to take away that distance so that that person can't move that well relative to me. So the only way we can start that process is to make connections. Now, once I gain some ground or I progress to a point where I start to make things uneven, where I have more control over them than they can adequately resist, I have to be able to maintain that connection. The longer I can exhibit control, the longer I can immobilize. The longer I can immobilize, the higher chance I have to strangle or break. So we have to be able to maintain our connections. And then I use the word to manage distance because distances are always changing. As we impose on our opponent, they're resisting our imposition. And then we are in this game of flux where this is constantly happening. So we're constantly making and maintaining connection for the purpose of controlling distance, both in the face of progression and in the face of resistance.
Which is why mat space is always an issue, right? People are backing out so far because of this core reason, right?
Oh, funny, in our culture, I try to always urge progression. So I can't stand people backing up. And so I talk about it in the room all the time. Like, nothing's behind you. Where are you running? The track meet's over there. Like, we're not here to run. We're here to, fight, stay facing each other.
Exactly. And then lastly, within this idea of global invariance, you talk about segmentation, destabilization, and isolation. Are these like skills, the core skills within these global environments that are happening at all times? Is that the right way to think about it?
For sure, we can define them as, so we can define making connection as a skill. We can define maintaining connection as a skill, and its first level of functions managing distance. So we can define that as a skill. And so within that, we can get smaller and smaller. And the next thing we're doing is what we're doing with these connections. How can we use these connections to increase how much immobility is in the system or resist it? And one of the first things that we try to do is segment. So the idea is that as I try to get close to hips, chest, shoulders, and back, and you present, let's say your arms, for example, you present them in segments. So the first one would be the longest point, which is your hands and wrist area. So in order for me to get closer, I would have to defeat that so that I can get one line closer. And these lines of demarcation are again at the segments. The hands and wrists is the first segment. Then you have the middle joints, the elbows and knees, and then you have your base joint, shoulders and hips. So as you present in your hands, like we're giving an example, the arm, it's hands, elbows, and shoulders. And so I grip and get closer to you relative to those lines of demarcation. And so that's segmentation.
Perfect. So that's the conceptual framework, the global invariance. That's what it is. Why is it so important for us jujitsu athletes to understand invariance?
Because these are the things that don't change. Anytime we see a specific movement pattern emerge, it's relative to these invariant things. The idea is that a human interacts with a human environment playing a human game. And so we pick up meaningful information, and meaningful being meaningful to us, the human playing this symbolic game. And so no matter how we move the arms, no matter what we call it, no matter a cool sequence of events, behind it, you will see the idea of interacting with hands, elbows, and shoulders to create this effect on your partner's body. So if we know that, we can analyze the specifics much more generally. So we understand exactly why it occurs. If we understand why it occurs, then we understand how it emerged. And if we understand how it emerged, we can create future opportunities for ourselves to find some consistency in those actions or to teach our students about why these things occur. So again, it just gives us a window into the emergence of human behavior.
And this is why this collaboration between you and Jake, I think, is amazing because Jake is so good at the details and the specifics. And if we can layer in this idea of invariance locally, globally into that, they can start to see the entire picture. So I'd love to transition now. Now that we understand what global invariants are, let's go into the different scenarios, the guarded, pinning, submitting, standing, and leg entanglement scenarios and talk about what are those local invariants? How does that global concept apply locally? And if we can start with the guarded scenario, can you talk about how those invariants apply to the guarded scenario for the top player and the bottom player?
For sure. So when a guarded scenario happens, this is when a bottom player hits the floor and it has its basically legs in front of the top player. Now, the guard takes many different forms, like it lines itself up in different ways relative to making and maintaining these connections to our opponent from a grounded position. Now, we call these local invariants because the invariants that present here are local to guarded situations, all guarded situations. And we can even get more specific. If we want to analyze a specific type of alignment in the guard, then there might be some local invariants there, or things that are relative to what we're doing only to that alignment. And so it's important that we're able to define these. So from a guarded structure, we're making and maintaining connection largely with our feet and knees. Okay, they take up the brunt of the distance management when we're grounded. They are the thing that we present to the passing player that is going to allow us to manipulate the passing player or what happens there. So what's interesting about a guarded scenario is when we hit the floor and a person starts to impose upon us or start to act upon us, something special is happening. We're carrying weight. And the thing about carrying weight from a guarded structure is it's fatiguing. So on a long enough timeline, if you're above me and you're pressing into me and holding me on that floor, I have to resist that. That resistance over time is going to create fatigue, and much more so than a top player. A top player largely has a little bit of free energy going on. They're falling. Okay, they have a little bit of gravity they can use to kind of put their weight on me and sap my energy. So that's what's happening. So now I have to understand exactly what my connections are doing now relative to the pressures I'm experiencing in this given situation or this local situation. And of course, we're assuming making and maintaining connection as our base skill to manage distance. That's really what we do from all neutral positions. We have to do that because we can't even begin to fight. Now, I would argue that if we were to say that there was a priority in a guarded situation, it would be destabilization. So the idea is once I make and maintain connection, I'll be carrying that weight. And the only way that I can make it uneven so that that weight is not going to ultimately fatigue me is to make my top player fall towards the floor. So we would guide the bottom player to use their connections to destabilize the top player towards their hands or towards their butt so we can offset some of that weight that we will be carrying. Now, destabilization, I've said this before, it refers to two things. It refers to falling, like ruining the structure so that the structure falls down in a specific direction. Or we talk about it as the denaturing of the structure of a limb, so it can no longer apply and receive force. A bent limb becomes more twistable, a straight limb becomes more straightenable. And this is also an example of destabilization. So as the bottom player, using our guard, carrying weight, the local invariants are make and maintain connection to manage distance through destabilization. This is going to be our central priority when learning this position.
And for the top player, and it seems like the biggest global invariant is just gravity, right?
Well, it's the thing that we're fighting against once we hit the floor, really, or once
Yeah.
we're being connected to and being thrown to the floor. We're now dealing with not only our partner's efforts to pull us down, but the natural effort of, the planet we live on,
Yeah.
pulling us towards the center.
And I'm going to guess for the top player, the priority is it to stay on top, hold your partner down, as you mentioned.
Well, so we're maintaining connection for the purpose of managing distance. That's why I use that because the top player is also managing distance, but rather than hold it at a specific space, they're trying to close it. So their priority skill here is segmentation. We need to start removing the bottom player's connections. The bottom player can no longer manage distance effectively by keeping us away and making us fall towards the mat. So we, the top player, need to start segmenting, removing hands or removing feet, getting close to knees, getting close to elbows, ultimately trying to apply weight to the hips, chest, shoulders, and back.
Yeah, now I see exactly why you structured the foundations class the way you have when you do that guarded scenario. Can you just describe
Sure.
that game that you have people do to practice that segmentation process?
Yeah, for sure. So, when we first start a new player, typically we don't actually give them the goal of chest to chest to chest to back. At first, we just give them the goal. You have to stay standing. Your job is to clear your partner's feet and knees and get as close to them as possible. You can put your hands anywhere you want on the body, but at no time can you drop to your knees, and at no time can you use chest to chest. But again, you have to keep their feet off of you. You have to keep their hands off of you, and you have to get as close to them as you can without putting your chest on their chest on their back, or dropping to your knees. And what this does, it teaches a top player how to remove connections while just moving close enough and staying there under the resistances of being pushed and pulled by the bottom player for the purpose of making them fall. So they start to learn how to resist what the bottom player's connections are doing as they try to stay on top, hold the bottom player down, and remove those connections. Because this is what will be the foundation of all grappling behavior from the top and bottom player's perspective. Because until that destabilization occurs, that segmentation occurs, we can't move to that next point of progression and weakening our opponent's body.
And then as the player progresses, I think you mentioned scaling that game to, instead of passing just the line of the feet, going to the line of the knees next, and then is it pinning the hips after that?
For sure. I mean, you can organize this any way that you would like. You can start with the end in mind. Like we could start at the hips and just play, keep your hands connected, hold the bottom player down, don't let them get up. But for example, you won't let them move from the hips. So you got to stay there. Or you could have them start at the end of the feet and try to get to the hips. Or you could start them somewhere in between. It doesn't matter. As long as they're staying on top, holding their partner down, and practicing the skill of segmentation, no matter what intention you give them or no matter where you focus their attention, they're doing something that's going to contribute to the overall development of the skill of segmentation as it relates to immobilizing. So again, it doesn't matter where you start a beginner. You just have to control the variability in such a way that the beginner knows exactly what they're doing, and they know where to put their attention. They know what they're trying to accomplish. If they don't know that, it's going to be very hard to organize their behavior into something meaningful.
I hope listeners can tell this is why this is different from positional sparring.
Yeah. Well, here, I was thinking about this the other night, man. Here's the thing. Like we can call it whatever we want. The name does not matter. Positional sparring, CLA, situational sparring. Everyone's fucking arguing the name of a thing. Forget the name of the thing. What I'm trying to help people understand is that as coaches and as practitioners, and we're talking about jiu-jitsu moves, we're talking about human behaviors. And we have to understand the nature of human behavior and why it exists. If we don't have a framework for human behavior, why it exists and how we get it to emerge, then we really don't know what we're doing. We're just guessing. And the best guess would be to spar. That's the best guess we have. Like, yeah, go try to hold that dude down. That works. You know what I mean? But if we want to analyze things more deeply and actually know what the hell we're manipulating, we have to know what's going on at a level of behavior. Like, how are we perceiving things? How are we organizing our movement? What's controlling our movements? What's controlling our perception? Again, if we don't know that, it can be very difficult to design a good practice.
Yeah, not to get really specific, I know within Jake's database, it's really cool to see what people are searching, and tripod passing and camping are two terms that are being searched a lot right now. I know we're getting a bit into the weeds in the
it's
specifics.
Good. No, it's not. It's good.
Yeah, but could you describe how those local invariants apply to tripod passing to start?
So camping is line holding. So we've been teaching the line holding method for, getting closer to opponents since I started teaching jiu-jitsu. So the idea is that if I clear the feet and get to the knees, can I stay at that line? Can I negate your ability to put your feet back on me? Can I do it while stepping in between knees or outside your knees? This is what people are calling camping. Now, the reason I don't like to use that term camping, it's a cool term for gaming, right? But the whole idea is that I'm not necessarily trying to stay here all the time. I want to get here and hold this line. I need to hold it long enough so I can create an opportunity to move to that next line. So maybe knees to hips, for example, or maybe holding the line of the hips and moving to the line of the elbows. So just understanding that once I clear one line, advance to another, I need to exist there long enough to get to that next line. And I need to exist there long enough to get to that next line. And that's the skill. That's segmentation. That's line holding. That's what we're trying to understand. Now the community calls it camping, right? That's fine. I don't care. Name it what the fuck you want. But that's what it is.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they call it camping because they see in the whole game, the reason we want to hold that line, it seems is then to progress and further immobilize our opponent. I wonder if they call it camping because they think it also serves a purpose of just draining the energy of the opponent because of them holding our weight. So I guess that maybe they're emphasizing that function rather than a demarcation point of getting to.
Well, then what I would argue is that you need to say that then. So I know camping from first person shooters, right? You have that asshole that camps a spawn point, and every time you try to fucking emerge, it just kills you, right? That was a problem in gaming, like right when the online gaming scene for FPS has started becoming popular. The creators didn't realize that their game was a little bit broken if we had known spawn points, because the guys who play 14 hours a day will memorize those, and you're fucked once you die because they're just going to camp your shit. So like that's where that term came from, I think. But either way, of course, we have to understand the function of our action. So as we're going from one line to another, we should assume fatigue, because the more someone carries us from the top position, the more quickly they'll get tired. So maybe we could think of a better way to talk about that, and myself included, you know. But I don't think,
Mhm.
I mean, camping is fine, but again, it's just, if I said that to a random person, they wouldn't know what the hell I meant unless they gamed. Mm.
Right. And that's why it's important to go through these definitions, I think. How about tripod passing? It's such a hype right now. How do those invariants apply to tripod passing specifically?
Oh, good. I like that. So the thing is like Joseph Chen's the popular guy right now. He's had amazing performances recently. He's a wonderful grappler. He's got a variability of skill set. He's exciting to watch. So all these things, what is Joseph Chen doing? What Joseph Chen's doing is challenging the shit out of himself by training all the time, training with tough people, and going out there and competing multiple times a weekend against some of the toughest guys in the world. So fuck tripod passing. If you want to be like Joseph Chen, live that lifestyle, because that's what Joseph Chen's doing. Either way, the interesting thing about the Joseph Chen's tripod passing here is that, so he's a long guy, and this is my assumption, again, just by watching him, is what he does is he's getting to a base joint. So, and it seems like he skips the hips. So he goes right to the shoulders. And this could be because of the invariant nature of his length. All right. So the individual constraint of his long arms and like the length of his body might give him this opportunity. He might see it and might feel like, oh, if I get to these shoulders, I can pin your ass to this mat. And then what he does is he holds your shoulders down while he lets his legs do the segmentation from feet, knees to hips. So again, rather than being like at the feet, at the knees, and using your arms to get to the waist or the hips, like we would consider body lock style passing, he does something a little different. He stays high and close, and he drops in on you. Once he gets those shoulders, he locks his hands, puts his head on one side to hold you still and square, and uses his legs to do the rest of the process. So again, it's just an idea of he's immobilizing the base joint of the shoulders, keeping them square to the mat, and performing the segmentation process with his legs. He's clearing feet, knees to hips with his legs while holding your shoulders down. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, and Jake has a full breakdown of the Elijah Dorsey and Joseph Chen match on YouTube, so we'll link that in the description. And Greg, it was awesome to hear even more of the invariants that you described about staying square and whatnot, and the 2-on-1, the two legs attacking one instead of one leg attacking one, as it applies to tripod passing, butterfly guard, etc.
Yeah, because we're ultimately all doing the same thing. So let's imagine if I were going to do body lock style passing, right? I wanted to get to my opponent's hips, right? So when we clear the feet and we get to the knees by stepping in between them on the outside of them, what we're essentially doing is cutting the body in half. We're removing one of the legs as a connecting feature. So if I keep both feet and I move them off of me and I step in between your legs and I split them, now there's one leg on the inside, one leg on the outside. So I'm only really dealing with half of your legs. So it becomes a little easier to start getting to the hips. Now, Joseph Chen is doing the same thing with his legs, for example. So when he's attached to the shoulders, he doesn't want both legs in between his knees because two legs are better at lifting than one. So he's clearing one at a time so he can resist, or he can negate some of that resistance from the bottom player, making the segmentation process ultimately easier. So if we were to look back at any type of segmentation, whether it's done with the arms to get to the hips, or we get all the way to the shoulders and do our use our legs, we'll see this general process. Feet, knees, hips, cut, or feet, knees, cut the body in half, get to the hips. We see this over and over and over again.
Yeah, and it happens the same way, I guess, whether you go outside, through the legs, around the legs, over the legs, it's continuing to beat the feet first, holding that, then beating the knees, it seems.
Yeah, if you just listen to this, if you just listen to this conversation we're having, and then start watching matches, you'll see it over and over and over again. Because the thing is, these specifics, they're not. I don't know how to describe this well, but they're not real. Like, I mean, they are, but they're it's called degeneracy, right? It's the way that biological systems organize to solve problems in a similar or dissimilar way. So the idea is that as we try to solve the problem of getting past the feet, knees, and hips, we're going to organize in many different ways to do this. But no matter how we organize our body to do it, if we are successful, we will see the segmentation of feet, knees, hips as it relates to any type of guard pass, whether it's done with our arms, whether it's done with the specific angles we take, whether it's done with our legs. Again, it's just going to keep repeating. We're going to see it.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important to understand this because me, as I'm a beginner, I've been training 2 years, still a white belt. And when I go to class and I'm watching, oh, that's one way to do it. But it's impossible for me to try to memorize all these specific ways to do it. But rather, if I can mentally just say, oh, this is another way we're segmenting. Oh, this is one way we're segmenting to get to the feet. This is another way we're segmenting to get beyond the hips or beyond the knees. I think that can help just the overall knowledge of or knowledge about
No, yeah, knowledge of, no, for sure, for sure. Because the thing is when you take action against a body and you come up with an effective solution to pass, you don't want to care about how it looks, or you don't want to care about what style it was. It doesn't matter. As long as you're effectively able to do it, it gives you some freedom as the acting player. So let's say you're really good at, let's say, getting to the hips first and then segmenting. Well, maybe you want to experiment in a different way. Maybe you meet a guy where you can't get to his hips. So maybe you're going to go to the outside and try to get to the shoulders first and then use your legs to do it. So the idea is if you understand that there's an invariant nature to this process, you can challenge yourself by trying to achieve it in different ways, making your skill set more robust and more adaptable. So again, if we can segment with arms, great. But if we can segment with both legs and arms, it's even better. If I can pin you with just your hips, that's great. But if I can pin you with your shoulders as well, that's great. It's even better. So
Yeah.
it gives us that freedom.
When you understand the why, then the how it'll find itself basically.
For sure.
So that's guarded. Let's transition here to pinning scenarios, chest to chest and chest to back. How do those invariants apply there?
Yeah. So the thing is, before I get to what exactly we're resisting, the idea is that to make a body pinnable, we have to make chest to chest or chest to back contact. We have to be able to cover the hips and shoulders simultaneously. So I need to be able to apply weight to center mass, and I need to be able to cover the last 2 points of rotation, which are the shoulders and the hips. That's chest to chest or chest to back. Now, what we're creating chest to chest and chest to back contact for, and why we're covering the shoulders and hips, is to manage 4 basic problems. The problem of limb extension. This is people pushing us away. The limb retraction. This is getting their limbs in front, potentially to push away. Rotation and basing. So being able to cover the hips, chest, shoulders, and back, or excuse me, chest to chest, hips and shoulders, or chest to back, hips and shoulders, we can solve those 4 problems at once. We can stop extension, we can stop retraction, we can stop rotation, we can stop basing, and we can stop it as they present themselves. So these are the invariants of pinning. Remove what's pushing on us. Don't let things get back in front of us. Don't let your partner turn. Don't let them push off the floor. And that, again, chest, back, hips, shoulders solves this problem.
Yeah, when it comes to extension, it's extension relative to us for the purpose of managing distance, right? But when you have extension where, when you're in mount, for example, and you're talking about extending their elbows above their head, then that extension is different, it seems.
Yep. Let's talk about it. So you're talking about the difference you're talking about in position, really. And so the thing is, there's no good or bad position. So and again, I'm going to get fucking fired for this if people hear it. But what I mean is, the only positions that are bad are ones that are imposed upon us. So, for example, we're trying to manipulate some general states of the body. So, to produce force and receive force, we're using 2 different things. So, we're using extension of the limbs and contraction of the limbs. We're using the squaring of the body and the staggering of the body or the limbs, right? So, that's what we're using to move around the world. We're going from square to staggered, and we're extension, contraction in different directions, right? So, if I'm using extension, contraction, squaring and staggering against you, and I'm imposing it on you, it is good. If you are imposing it on me, it is bad. Again, so if I'm using my limbs to extend to push you away to create space, good thing. If you are extending my limbs so I can't push you away, that's a bad thing. And so we're manipulating the same states, because if you think about it, we're actually an even system. When 2 bodies line up, it's a spine, 2 arms and 2 legs, hips and shoulders, right? And so what we have, because we're even, that's why we call it neutral. And then what we do is we create an unevenness as we interact. And then we continue to create greater levels of unevenness. And this has a lot to do with the states I just mentioned, creating states of extension, contraction, staggeredness, and squareness, but for the purpose of imposing it upon somebody and resisting its imposition on us.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a stupid question here. So, from the bottom player's perspective in a pin, why is it advantageous to be staggered on like 2 of our points on the ground versus when we're all 4? And then where does rotatability come into this?
For sure. So surface area is your first reason. So when I'm square, I've got a large surface area that you're applying weight to. So the larger that surface area, the more weight it carries, and the more balanced the top player is going to be. They're going to feel very comfortable, dividing their weight across a wide and even surface, right? But if we look at rotation, that's not so much stable for the top player, and the bottom player doesn't have to carry as much weight across a greater surface. So by rotating onto 2 points, the bottom player starts to become a little bit more mobile. Now, rotation is also the way that we produce power. So by rotating, I can generate motion. So I can affect the way your weight is being applied to me. So both rotating to create motion and positioning myself on my side is a way that we deal with and manage carrying weight. It's a way that we start to immobilize ourselves and present a structure that's more difficult to hold still.
I know on Friday we talked about mount and how obsessive you are with mount. I'm curious
Um,
about this elbow extension. So as the bottom player, if my elbows are fully extended above my head, it seems like it's like you said, it's easier to rotate, right? Versus if my elbows are perpendicular, like.
for sure.
for- so would we want the bottom player's elbows to be around this perpendicular level, like kind of like a cross, versus being
Yep.
fully extended or fully retracted so they
Well,
can't rotate?
it depends on what we're doing. Let's imagine this game was a pinning game and it wasn't a submission game. I just had to hold you flat. Then the answer would be yes. At it's 90, my arms get in the way of rotation. So if I could find some grip to like pull your arms and stick them there, man, I'm going to pin very, very well because I'm going to reduce your ability to rotate, right? However, when an elbow goes above the shoulder, things start to present. So we start to create the potential for head and arm strangulation because we're starting to present two things that can close around the arteries to start strangulation. By extending it above the head, I'm also giving myself access to the shoulder as the attacking player. I can start moving my hips from covering your hips to covering your shoulders so I can move into braking positions on the arm. But then I can afford more rotation to start exposing a line to your back. So we're exposing ourselves to that potential rotation as a way to progress our positioning by either introducing a more powerful position, i.e., getting to the shoulders or getting to the back, or by the introduction of threat. So, threat being the introduction of strangulation, the introduction of breaking, because control in this game can be exhibited both directly and indirectly. Directly being, like, for example, the 90-degree position. I'm using my structure directly against your structure to prevent motion. Indirectly would be like if you row this way, you go into a strangle. You're not going to rotate that way unless you feel like you can risk that potential strangle and then ultimately escape. But either way, the movement is managed indirectly through the fear of potential submission.
It's interesting to me that as you isolate, like let's say from mount, you're going to transition to try to isolate the arms, extend them above the opponent's head, and go for a head and arm strangle. It's interesting to me that as you gain isolation, it seems like you lose a little bit when it comes to immobility.
Well, you do. So the thing is you again, the threat becomes the main mechanism for control at that point. So, like I said, if we imagine it was a pure pinning game, once we matched shoulders to shoulders, hips to hips, and we created some evenness by like putting the limbs in a way where they could no longer extend, contract, rotate, or base, the game has been won. But the thing is if I want to attack, less of your body with more of my body, I'm going to have to give up some of that whole body direct control, and I'm
Hmm.
going to have to pull more of myself to a smaller portion of you so I can enhance breakability and strangleability, which in itself is a little bit as it relates to control, a little bit paradoxical because I'm reducing control directly over the whole body and I'm imposing threat, which if done well and controlled well, it turns into a break or strangle because you're now going to be immobile relative to me. So you're not going to be you might not necessarily be immobile relative to the floor, but you're immobile relative to me. And so even if you move a little bit, I don't separate from you and something breaks, someone goes unconscious. And so we have to take that risk and reducing control to get to those points.
Right. It seems very systematic. Like once you gain control of center mass, then you can reattack the periphery. You can give up just enough control or maintain just enough control to attack the periphery without giving up too much control where then.
For sure. I mean, we're still trying to hold the whole system still, don't get me wrong, but we now have to do it in a different way. Again, it's the threatening of the straightening of a limb that will break if we can hold it still enough. It's
Mhm.
the threatening of rotating a limb that will break it if we can hold it still enough. And then, of course, strangulation as well. So again, this is why effective is so important to understand because enough is enough. We only have to do it once in a just with just enough energy. So again, this is why we train so much to understand what type of input we need to achieve these ends.
It reminds me of just so I give a specific example of what you're talking about, like a from a traditional like arm bar breaking position or like spider web or whatever you want to call it. Um, if you just have like a traditional arm bar breaking position with one like torso leg and one crossface leg, if they build height and start to get their back off the mat, there's no consequence for them necessarily. Like that would be a good route for their escape. But if you are able to pummel your torso leg into a second crossface leg, now if they were to build height, there's a threat of a triangle. Like as soon as their back comes off the mat, there's a threat of a triangle. So now you're kind of like imposing that indirect control over them because you're indirectly holding them down to the mat because of that triangle threat.
For sure.
Yeah.
So remember, there are two surfaces of immobilization, right? We get sandwiching between me and the mat. Okay, that's two surfaces. This would be like what we would call like absolute immobilization. This is when I mush you and I don't let you move. But then there's me to you to the floor, which is like a backpack. So like, let's say I'm behind you. It's like a back relative to your backpack. You're immobile. Like you spin around, that backpack stays on you. You know what I mean? Now, if that backpack had little strangling devices, you're fucked, right? So again, breaking is or strangulation, breaking, and mobilization is relative to the surfaces in which you're imposing that level of immobilization. You can impose it relative to you, or you can impose it relative to you on the floor. But either way, if there's stillness relative to those two surfaces, you become more strangleable and more breakable. And so this is why, like for example, when we talk about the invariance of the arm lock, we say connect it to the shoulder or the base joint, separate the hands and hold them down towards the floor, because that's where the pressure is going and that's what's causing the stillness. It's that relative alignment, or what we call relative degree.
Are there differences between the invariance of chest to chest and chest to back, or is it just relative to the floor that makes the difference?
No. So again, the differences here have to do with how we manage extension, retraction, and rotation, right? So we're still managing the same problems, but what we're managing them for is different. So for example, if I'm chest to chest, the extension mechanism, extending, creates that space chest to chest. They become frames, right? But if I have someone facing the floor, those extenders become movers. So they start moving the body. And so we always remove what's pushing on us or remove what's pushing on the floor. So if someone's extending on me, pushing me away, I need to remove what's creating that space so I can close that gap. When I'm on your back, and if I want to hold you to the floor and you start pressing off that ground, I have to remove what's pressing on that ground so I can take you closer to the floor. Now, we can cheat it by, of course, getting a strangle while they're pressing the ground, which is totally fine because that's the goal of our game. But if we want to understand immobilization, absolutely, then anytime we're dealing with extension, we remove what's pushing. And again, that's the way the invariant changes slightly. What is the effect of the extender? And again, chest to chest, it's pushing us. Chest to back, it's pushing the floor.
Right. Because when they push the floor, then they're changing how gravity is affecting them, right? Or they're using gravity as an advantage.
They're gaining mobilization by mobilizing themselves. And this is something that we've all dealt with. We've all been in a position where we get behind somebody and they press off the floor and turn super hard, and we lose them in that battle for motion or stopping motion, right? And we've all had it the other way, right? We've gotten past the legs, we're going to make that transition from the hips to the shoulders, and we get shoved back away. You know what I mean? We can't close that gap. So what we do with our opponent's mobilizers, which extension creates space and creates the potential for movement, we have to remove that. Okay, because if we're trying to immobilize, we can't let the space get created, and we can't let them touch that floor. We got to keep them off surfaces so they can't produce power, which inadvertently will produce space, either through the manipulation of me and or the manipulation of their own structure. Both can solve the immobility problem.
So to summarize, what's the priority for chest to chest pinning versus chest to back pinning?
Again, it's just, I would say if there was one, it's remove what's pushing. So if I'm chest to chest, rotation's okay. It's not terrible, but rotation combined with limb retraction is bad. Rotation combined with limb extension is bad. So like if I allow two of those problems to be presented to me at once, the likelihood that they escape is going to be high. So I would say above, if I had one priority, to remove what's pushing. This is how I experience it, and this is what I teach my students. And it seems to work well for us as it relates to maintaining the pin.
Perfect. Now, as we're pinning, from there, we're searching for submissions. Can you break down the invariance when it comes to strangulation and breaking?
Yes, this is pretty simple. So I think Danaher does the best job with strangulation, so I like to use his words there. He uses a term double closure. Basically, we need to put two things around the neck. So if we get 2 points of pressure or compression around the neck and we squeeze it, blood stops going to the brain. So we define strangulation as having two types, naked and arm in. So naked is when it's just you around the neck. Arm in is when the arm is included in the pressuring. So to strangle an immobile body, we need to put any structure around the neck, arms or legs, that can cause compression on both sides. That's with arm included or without arm included.
What about an air choke where you're just blocking air to the trachea?
So I think this is fine. Again, I think about it like this. So we there are certain things we know that create known outcomes. Like the historical record, we know that if we can create these conditions, we get these outcomes. Everyone goes to sleep. And so what I would say is that we want to try to aim for something more physically certain, like cutting off the blood. Some people can breathe through their ears. You know that guy you've had in that like 10-finger guillotine that's pressing in the neck, and they don't care. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm not saying they don't exist. Of course they do, but the question is do we search for it, or do we want something more physically certain? So it's not that it doesn't exist, but it is an example of compression and the effects of compression. Now, the effects of compression could have secondary ones that we don't know about. So compression could physically certain cut off blood and make them go unconscious. Great. It could press in that whatever the hell that is and make you breathe terrible. Or it could even give you some, cervical like twisting that'll make you tap from pain. So I would say getting around the neck and applying pressure can cause those effects. We're going to search for the most physically certain one, which is stopping blood flow. But if we get people to tap because they can't breathe, or we get people to tap because their neck hurts, I'll take it.
Yeah, and that's why the invariants are so important, because then a arm in triangle, arm in guillotine, a arm in rear naked choke, whatever other names you
Yeah.
have for these things, all become the same thing essentially.
Well, Darce, Anaconda, Triangle, Buggy, they're all examples of arm and strangles. So if we know that we have the arm and head together, we just have to know what mechanism we're using to cause compression, and we can focus our energy there. And so again, how this helps us is if we're exploring the space, we want to create some novelty, we create the condition of how many different ways can we put the head and arm together? Can we do it with our leg? Can we do it with our arms? Can we do it with our arm and body? Can we do it with our leg and body? Can we do it chest to back? And now we become adaptable and variable fighters. Now we can create a condition that has a known outcome in variable ways. And so this is why if we know that, then we have more freedom of action.
Yeah, we could put them in the arm in, arm out scenario, upside down, behind them, in front of them, with our arms. Yeah, like you said. So what is the priority for the attacker and the defender in the arm in, arm out scenario?
So we call these priorities and submissions precursors. These are conditions that we must create to cause those effects. So if we're talking about head and arm strangulation, largely we're manipulating the elbow, assuming that we have the hand out of the way. Again, we're doing one of two things with this elbow to start causing the conditions that can create compression around the neck with the arm in. It's either contracting it in towards the center line so we can get underneath it and trap it to the neck, or we're creating extension so we can get underneath or behind it so we can create that compression. We can create that condition in both states. Again, states of contraction, we can get under or behind the elbow, and states of extension, we can get under or behind the elbow. So again, it's relative to what's happening in any current moment. But again, knowing that we need to drive the elbow in towards the center, away from the center, is the precursor for creating this head and arm connection, is what we work on. So that will be priority number one. The second priority would be maintaining that. So again, once we get the elbow into extension or into contraction, we have to trap it there. We have to put something behind the elbow and something on the other side of the neck to keep everything locked together. So that elbow cannot create space to reduce the compression it's experiencing on one side. So again, using extension to create the connection of head and arm, and then maintaining the connection of head and arm by getting behind the elbow and compressing it in towards the neck.
Amazing. That makes so much sense. It's like, oh, why do I spend so much time trying to memorize these little tiny details when these are the invariant things that never change in the arm in, arm out scenario?
For sure. Like when I'm in mount, right? When I'm like, my guys are holding me down and pinning me and trying to beat me up, right? So I try different things with my hands. So I know that my elbow needs to go in a specific place to even start it. So even when I'm terribly mounted and I'm being crushed, if I can, let's say the last thing I have to worry about is where this elbow is. So all my attention goes there, and I know where I don't want it. I don't want it here. I don't want it here. So now you can explore this whole space of hand and elbow positioning relative to my opponent trying to impose extension and contraction. Again, now I don't have to know 1,000 ways to get out. I just have to know you are not getting that elbow inward or upward. I'm not letting you do it. And so,
yeah, that makes so much. It simplifies the game so much, instead of like, oh, what counter do I have for this thing? And what if they do that, then what counter do I have to that? No, it's just like your elbows cannot get contracted or extended. It's like,
because there's really only one counter. If we were to look at all the cool moves that anyone has ever done to counter something, we're going to see this. We're going to see something they did with their elbow, and it's going to be something that affects the person's ability to put it in one of two states and affects the grip. So again, we have to beat their connection, and we have to deny a specific condition. Like if we knew that, then we'll have all kinds of novel ways to stop it from happening.
Perfect. And how about for naked strangulations, the guillotines, the rear naked choke?
So I think the condition here is removing the defenders. So the thing about just getting around the neck is largely the person's hands are free. So, John Dannerden does a great job with this. He talks about like when you're behind somebody, we're trying to reduce that deficit. So imagine in all naked strangles, we have one arm going around the neck facing two defenders. We need some way to put those defenders somewhere else so they're not monitoring the neck. So we can do this directly or indirectly. So we can create conditions where we get a hold of the hands first and move them out of the way or keep them out of the way so we can get into the neck. Or we can indirectly control it by forcing those hands to go to the mat, for example. So I can control them and pull them away, or I can manipulate your body in such a way where you have to use your hands to do something else. Again, that removes the defenders from the neck so that I can get one of my arms all the way around your neck. So we can put our students in alignments where they're supposed to get to the hands or make the hands do something.
And then that third defender is like the chin, right? Because man, I have some trouble getting that
For sure.
around that third one.
So again, I'm gonna if we were trying to be super clean and Mr. Nice Guy, we're removing that chin. I'm never removing that chin. I'm gonna make the chin part of your spine. So if I go around your neck and you put your chin in the way, that's coming with me. You know what I mean? So because I think about it like this. If I spent all that time trying to dig this little bit out, I might lose everything. If you put it in there and I add it to the closure, I'm pretty sure I can finish. So again, it doesn't mean we can't focus on removing that because it is a potential defender. Don't get me wrong, but I would say learn how to be mean, man.
Jake and I are
Crush
too
it, man.
nice.
Yeah. Don't be nice to each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's strangulation. How about breaking? You mentioned twisting. You mentioned straight breaks. What are the invariants there?
For sure. So we really only have three that I've noticed. So the first is we have to attach the base joint. Now the thing is if the center mass can move, it can reduce the pressure on the arm. A perfect guy to look at, or two guys that are really good at this shit, that if you watch them, they get out of crazy arm locks, are J-Rod and Gary Tonin. Like J-Rod will literally go in the opposite direction sitting up and his arm will be extended, but because there's no pressure on the shoulder, he knows that his shit's not going to break. So connecting to your partner's shoulder and holding it to the floor. So immobilizing at center mass is your first invariant. So again, staying connected and trying to hold the shoulder to the floor is the first one. The second one is separating the hands from everything else. So we're staying connected, we're separating the hands from everything else, and then we're going to either extend it or twist it. So we extend it in one direction to create breaking, or we twist it in one direction to create breaking.
How about between breaking arms and legs? Is there any difference there?
No, we're following the same general rules. We want to attach to the base joint so that we can stay close to the hips and hold them relative to the floor. We want to make sure that the leg is not interacting with anything else. And then we're straightening it to continue straightening it, or we're bending it so that we can twist it. And then the way that we define this really, if we get more specific to the leg itself, is attached to the hips. We want to maintain lateral hip knee alignment. And now this is for heel hook specifically. Like if I want to twist the leg, I want my hips facing the side of the knee, right? And then I have to get the toes. If I'm talking about a knee bar, we attach to the hips at one side, we straighten the leg, but we want our hips lined to the front side of the knee. So it's still where we line up with that middle joint, but when we straighten it, we want to be on the front of it. When we twist it, we want to be on the side of it. So let's try to clean that up. So priorities for strangulation is removing the defenders and creating a state extension or contraction relative to the neck. So those would be the two conditions that are going to lead to strangulation. Or at least the precursors that can lead towards strangulation. And then for breaking, we basically have connecting to the base joint, removing it from everything that's attached to, and getting a grip that will allow us to either straighten or twist it. And I'm using the global of either arm or leg. So again, it's base joint, separation, straighten, twist, because that's arm or leg. Again, if we're talking about legs, we would be more specific to the leg. If we're talking about arms, we're being more specific to the arms. But
this might be diving a little more into like specifics, but like for something like a guillotine, would you say that an invariant would be not necessarily like hip to hip contact, but like the goal of getting your hips closer to their hips so that you could finish the guillotine kind of thing?
So I don't know to which degree, but we actually always talk about this, like coverage is being relative. So let's use the arm lock breaking position first. Okay. So let's say that in your mind, you're imagining this perfect arm lock breaking position where you're lined up perpendicular. And now let's say the fingers are where the head is and the wrist is where the hips are. If I angle my body as the braking agent towards the head, and I apply pressure, that person can rotate. If I angle myself towards the hips and apply braking forces, we can increase the immobilization in the system. Rotation becomes harder. So I think this is sort of true. Anytime we're aligning to a break, we go towards the hips. Like we can even, I don't know if you can imagine this stuff in your head. I apologize, guys. I don't have physical examples for you. But let's say someone's turtled and I'm on their back and I'm doing like a belly down arm lock. And I have to know where to face. If I face the head, they move. If I face the hips, it holds the head down, they move less. So generally facing the hips, and I say generally because we need to pick this apart because there might be examples where it's not. Facing the hips enhances strangleability and breakability because it also enhances immobilization relative to how close you are to them by facing them. So again, if I have you in a guillotine and I'm putting pressure on your head, but I'm going towards your hips and putting my hips towards your hips, I think this is why we get that strong strangulation force.
Gotcha. Yeah, and kind of along those same lines, for something like a straight ankle lock, do you go into like put toes in a state of extension type of statement, to is that part of the invariant of a straight ankle
Yeah.
lock?
So the thing is we're all, like, let's imagine we're using the ankle to either straighten it or twist it, right? So we need to know what the grip is doing, and it's doing something relative to the toes. So to get that strong break in the ankle, we want to extend it. So by starting someone in a position where they have control of the hips, meaning they're attached to them and they're holding them to the floor, they have a grip that they're using to keep the legs separated from everything else. Now the question is, what are we doing with that grip? And so if you want to use a specific intention for your students to help enhance their ability to learn how to straighten and break an ankle, it's pressure the toes. You know what I mean? And that's what you would tell them to do. Like you'll hear my cue this all the time. Like when my guys are hooking in competition, I'll say, weigh the toes, weigh the toes. That's just, I want them to put weight on what they're going to move. So when they're on the toes and they're putting weight on them, it makes it easier to stay under the heel. It's already producing a twisting force even before we get fully under the heel. And same thing with that straight ankle. Before we have that perfect grip that's going to break it, we're putting weight on those toes.
Awesome. So we got guarded, pinning, submitting. Two more, standing in scenario. This one's interesting because it's like you start neutral, right?
Yeah.
Versus the other one. So what are the invariants here?
So attack the perforating axis center mass. So that's that's really it, right? So we're going to make connection to the head, arms, and legs so that we can get to the center, really. And now the thing is, if we were to make it just super simple, let's just talk about not the legs. Let's assume that we can use the legs to get to the center, but because they're holding themselves up, they're mobile, they're moving around. So again, we can shoot on them to reduce that mobility so that we can either start putting them on the floor or use the leg to get to the hips, right? Or we can attack the head, arms, and legs by moving them out of the way so we can get our hands connected around the body. So let's imagine that everything before the floor is hand fighting the head and arms so we can get our hands locked around the body anywhere from the shoulders to the ankles. So again, I need to get my hands locked around you. Okay, I'm not saying it's not the only way to take someone to the floor, right? Let's say I had an underhook and I did like a knee pick. Like as you're falling, I'm bringing those 2 points together so that I can ultimately hold you down to the ground. But I need some mechanism to keep you from moving. And it can be just my body by closing my hands. Or if I make you fall down, I have to cover you relative to the floor. You see? So all the standing engagement is clearing out what's in front of you so I can access that center mass either by closing my hands around it or making it fall to the floor so I can cover it.
So the priority is, attacking the periphery, gain access to center mass. And then once you have access to center mass, get it to the floor if you're not on the floor already.
So destabilization. So once I get my hand connected around center mass, we're going to use that connection to make you fall towards the floor. So that's falling towards your hands or falling towards your hips. Now, the one thing that makes this falling happen is what we're doing to both legs. Essentially, all takedowns take both legs off of the floor. And we have to be, when we say that, we have to have a sharp eye. So even something like an underhook knee tap, like you're running them over so hard, their legs pop off the ground and they fall. If I'm doing something like an over-under grip and I'm using that to do an inside trip, it takes both legs off the floor. So the purpose of our connections are really to remove the legs from the floor, whether we do that by lifting, or whether we do that by stopping motion and destabilizing in one direction or another. Again, we make and maintain connection for the purpose of managing distance. And for this case, it's for destabilization. I want to make you fall towards the floor by removing your feet from it.
Maybe it's my lack of stand-up experience and understanding, but I feel like I have no more questions when it comes to the invariants of standing.
It's okay. It's interesting. I think this is going to sound kind of wild, but I think stand up is a little, I don't say less complex because it really isn't. What I mean is the goal I think is much simpler, but it's harder to gain because there's much more mobility in the system when we're standing. So really trying to produce some of that is most of the game. So trying to get someone to stop when they're running around on their feet, man, that's fucking hard, you know. But the actions are simple. You know, get past the head, hands, and elbows so that I can get my hands locked anywhere between your shoulders and your ankles. So I can use that connection to make you fall towards the floor by taking your feet off the floor. I mean, again, that's really what's happening ad nauseum over and over and over and over and over again.
It would seem like getting access to in terms of the center mass, the hips is more powerful than the shoulders from a standing engagement. Is that
Yeah.
true or?
I think so. So the hips, I always tell my guys, the hips are the seat of balance and power. If I can affect the seat of balance and power, I affect the whole system. So you can stay balanced and powerful with someone on your head. Now it's fatiguing, don't get me wrong, but you can still produce power from there. This is where you see like reshots happen. Like someone will snap somebody and they'll get their head free and shoot back in on the hips and take somebody down. So again, attaching to the shoulders is definitely part of the process. But I think if we were to find one line of demarcation that produces most of the effect, it's what's happening at the level of the hips. And so we're either grabbing the hips directly to create this strong effect, or grabbing the legs, which inadvertently attach to the hip, which creates strong effects. But the hip, I think, is the thing that we're ultimately trying to affect the most if we want to take a standing player to the floor.
And then as the defender, you're basically just trying to stop their access to your periphery. And then as soon as you stop it, see if you can gain access to theirs for the purpose of.
The problem is I present my periphery to get to stop yours. So that's what the hand fight is. So we're hand fighting over who has the majority of the connections. So the first level of unevenness is what happens at the hands. So if I have two hands on you and you only have one on me, I'm winning. I'm progressing, right? I'm creating the initial level of unevenness. Not only do I have more hands on you, but how are they positioned? If I'm in between, under, or behind your elbows when I'm connecting, it's uneven for you. So now I'm progressing, right? So the hand fight has its local rules here. So again, the first one is more versus less. I want to make it uneven. The second is structural unevenness. Can I get in between, under, or behind your elbows? If I can have more versus less, and I can be in, under, or behind, I have progressed strongly against your periphery. Now the likelihood that I have access to your center mass goes up, or that I'll be able to affect your balance in such a way that I'll make you fall and then gain access to it. But again, creating that unevenness is our first battle.
And once you create that unevenness, it seems like the likelihood to get to a leg even opens up too.
Well, that's the thing. So the thing about the legs, and the reason leg tackles are so prevalent in grappling sport, is because they're doing something. They're on the floor. We're physically certain where those legs are. They can't really go anywhere else. They're stuck doing a job, right? So we have to move them out of the way, and we have to use our head and hands to protect them, right? So if our head and hands get beat, our legs are sort of just fucking stuck there in the earth, like uh-oh, and then now you go get them, you know? So yeah, 100%.
Makes sense.
So
yeah. Even though these may seem like dumb questions, it is surprising. Jiu-jitsu is complex, but maybe not so complex. And it's good to just finally understand what this game is.
Well, I think the game itself. So I would, like I said in the beginning, I define this in two ways. Grappling is the action we take as it relates to using gripping and grabbing tactics to achieve the end of immobilization, strangulation, and breaking. That's grappling. We can express grappling as judo is grappling, Greco-Roman is grappling, and so it's all grappling. It's grappling tactic games, Now, jiu-jitsu is special because we're talking about the way we're going to try to achieve this end. And again, it's efficiency, it's with gentleness, or it's this idea that using more of myself against less of you to manage the effort that it takes to accomplish this end. So jiu-jitsu is a philosophy in my mind. I know other people say, no, judo is the philosophy. You get what I fucking mean, right? Whether we live the lifestyle of being gentle and, efficient, blah, blah, blah. I don't care about that. I'm talking about sport. So jiu-jitsu is the act of creating unevenness to gain an advantage in a sport-like context. It's the philosophy that we're using in a sport-like context to achieve these ends. So yeah.
Perfect.
I think it's simple, but it's complex in its arrangement.
Yeah. Okay, last scenario, which is one I'm very much a beginner in. Jake, this is his specialty area, leg entanglements. What are the invariants and priorities for the attacker and defender in leg entanglements?
So I think maintaining connection, destabilization, let's assume that that's taking place. Now, during that process, we're going to start switching to this idea of isolation. So an entanglement is a way that we isolate one leg from everything else by attaching to the hip. And the central way that we create this opportunity is through inside positioning. And so inside positioning is either relative to my feet, meaning I can get my feet in between your knees so that I can gain access to the hip, or I can get my knees in between your knees so I can gain access to your hip. So the thing is people like to split this difference. They're like, oh, it's both inside and outside position. No, it's all inside position. It's just what goes there first. So if my feet are on the outside and I use like rotating tactics, think K guard. If I use rotation to achieve that, it's my knees that are going to inside position first to start the isolation process. If I'm using like your typical stereotypical butterfly guard alignment or feet on the inside alignment, then I'm using my feet to achieve that end. But either way, I've got to get in between your legs so that I can gain access to your hip. And now once I gain access to your hip, I've got to be able to stay attached, and I have to immobilize it by downing it to the floor. And so this is what we're focusing on when developing entanglements. Again, we make the connection through the manipulation of inside positioning. We maintain the connection through destabilization towards the floor.
So if someone were to start learning leg entanglements for the first time, do you start them deep in an entanglement where you're already maintaining or connecting to the hip and then just trying to maintain them there?
Yeah. So one thing I like to do is, let's say there's a complex arrangements of limb connection, and I'd like to start them in it so they understand like what it is. Because if we understand what it is as an endpoint, then it becomes easier to get to that endpoint. Sometimes if it's not defined as an endpoint first, you have them searching for it, it can be a little head scratching, like what? You know? So we could think like I usually start with one of two types, what we call standard, which is knee and foot. So arimiashi, as Danaher calls it, right? So arimiashi is where we start a beginner, or outside, because these are very obvious and students tend to go towards these anyway. Like it's easy for the body to organize into these structures. So I start them there, and we play games where we stay attached to the hip using these structures. And we function by not only staying attached, but holding them down to the floor and keeping that leg isolated. So we just play a maintenance game where we maintain connection for as long as possible. Now, the defending player is going to be trying to separate our feet so they can pull their leg out any way that they can. And so that's where I would start somebody. So start them in the entanglement for the purpose of staying attached to and holding the hip down towards the floor as the resisting player tries to break connections and free their leg. And then I would back off into games where I'd achieve that end. And usually I start with a seated player. So I usually play, once we define it, I usually like to play a neutral game where we both have one leg on the inside and we're fighting for inside position, and then we're fighting for entanglement. If you get into entanglement, you win. That way they both can start getting the complex arrangement of moving our legs relative to one another, relative to that context. And then I back it up further by doing it a belly up player connected to the inside against a standing player. And so again, I start at the end point and then I manipulate backwards.
Got it. Endpoint, neutral, and then standing versus someone on the ground.
Yes.
And by neutral, do you mean 50-50?
Yeah, one leg each on the inside. So like I said, you sit down, I put 1 foot in between your knees, and you have 1 foot in between my knees. And we'll be pummeling for inside position. And then once we think we've gained it, we can try to attach to the hips.
Got it. Okay, so is that why some entanglements are more stable than other entanglements for the attacker? It's because of the majority of inside position, or am I understanding that right?
Let's define stability for you. What do you mean when you ask that question?
Yeah, I'm thinking like some leg arrangements seem more effective than other leg entanglements, and by effective I mean
meaning?
Yeah, I mean my ability to actually I don't even know what I mean. My ability to keep my hip close to your hip.
Okay, yeah,
Maybe.
for sure. I would imagine that some entanglements are more effective at doing that than others. Absolutely.
And is that the priority for the attacker?
I would say that if we're trying to maintain the entanglement, the priority is the same as if we're attacking an arm. We want to get as close to the base joint as possible. We want to hold that base joint towards the floor, and we want to separate the thing we're attacking from everything else. So these would be the priorities of the entanglement. Now we can deepen our understanding of this. So for example, if we want to use twisting locks, we're really going to try to prioritize the bending of the leg. So not only we staying connected, we're holding the player down, and we're keeping it separated. We're going to try to always be trying to bend that leg to make it more vulnerable to further twisting. If I want to start moving into straight locks, by keeping that leg locked out and straight and not letting it bend, is a way that we could enhance what's happening at that level of connection. Again, because different things are happening based on what we want the condition to, what type of condition we want to use to create what type of effect.
Right.
Because there are things outside of the invariants, but the invariants, again, guide us along that way.
Yeah, that's what seems a little different from a leg entanglement versus a chest to chest or chest to back pin is, oh, I guess maybe it's the same. The entanglement is the purpose of then being able to isolate and break.
Well, think about this, right? So when we're attaching to a leg for breaking, we isolate it from everything else. when we're attaching to center mass, we keep the periphery away from it. We don't want the periphery to go anywhere near that center because that's what's going to strengthen it. So we're isolating there too, but we're isolating that vulnerable piece, the hips, chest, shoulders, and back. We don't want anything in there. We want to be in there as the pinning player. We want to occupy all that space in between and under both limbs so we can make contact with chest and back and hips and shoulders for as long as possible. We want to be the stuff in there.
Right. And similarly, we want to be there controlling the hip, taking their hands away, their other leg away, everything away from.
We don't want the arms and legs near that center. This
Yeah.
is why, like, when we pass the guard, we're in front of the knees, so the knees can no longer retract to remove us from their hips. Or when we get under elbows, the elbows can no longer get in the way of that process. You know what I mean? The elbows can't contract to get the hands on you to create space. We're keeping the defenders out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so the defenders are now are being separated or being isolated so that we can further our progression to attack.
Hey, Greg, I'm kind of curious. I've found like a few things in our previous conversations. You've just said some things kind of like in passing, like every grip has a function and a limit. Like just little phrases like that I find to be very, very helpful. Are there any other phrases like that that like come to your mind? I'm sure there's tons, but any you could think of off the top of your head and you find yourself using quite a bit that you think would be useful?
Oh man, that's a hard one.
I know. Sorry.
No, honestly, I'll tell you why. Because a lot of my teaching is going to be relative to the questions that's asked of me. I feel like I adapt what I have to say to the people asking me the question, because I don't know what you want to know. So those things pop up a lot. Like I've got all kinds of shit, but it's really relative to things people ask me. So we already said a bunch. Hey, remove what's pushing on you. That's something I say all the fucking time. Like, are they pushing on you? Is that creating space? Remove what's pushing on you. You know what I mean? But no, as far as analyzing things go, like every connection has both, or every connection, every structure, every movement has both a function and a limit. Is important for analyzing behavior. So if we want to look at, let's say, a shape of a grip, well, why is it shaped that way? What's its function? And when does that function start to break down? You know what I mean? Are there things we do to enhance that function? Do we have to change the shape of our grip? Do we have to change the shape of our structure? Do we have to move in a different way? And I think that just helps us analyze movement a little bit better.
It kind of relates to this. How about when you're coaching athletes from the sidelines during competition? If we were to get a word cloud of like everything you've said before, what are the most common things you say to your athletes as they're competing?
Keep the feet off of you, make them turn away, give them more of what they want, extend the elbow, get behind the elbow, staple them to the floor, hard break, easy work. I don't know. I say the kind of the same shit all the time. I mean, the thing is like when I'm coaching people, I'm coaching people that train under me. So I'm saying these things to them in the room and they're building their skills relative to some of these informational constraints. And so if you notice, most of my informational constraints are based on effect. So condition and effect, like, clear the feet is a condition. Staple them to the mat as an effect. So I'm usually using language that is doing that. It's talking externally, or again, the focus externally of the condition they're trying to create or the effect they're trying to produce. And so I say a lot of things like that, hip focus, shoulder focus, keep the hands on the mat, put the hands on the mat, take them towards their butt, lift, height, build height, build height. You know what I mean? Straighten the limb, straighten the limb.
And it all relates to the invariance in that specific engagement, or like the priority, I guess.
For sure. I mean, because like everything that I shared with you guys, I created for my room. And this is what's funny. Like everyone is like, Souders is trying to reinvent the wheel and trying to create a brand. I literally use this every day. So whether I'm doing that or not, who fucking knows? But like everything I'm saying to you is exactly what I do. I mean, I created it. Like it's my creation. It's what I use. So of course there should be, you'll hear similarities because again, I use what I'm giving you guys. I didn't just make this up to give it to y'all. I use this stuff.
Again, in our previous conversation, you were talking about how initially we pin an opponent through keeping them flat on the mat by controlling their head and shoulders. And then we can also pin an opponent through limb extension, and then we rely on that extension to maintain the pin. But it seems like, okay, so maybe I'll just say this out loud and you can like agree or disagree. But you were talking about how they can resist through limb extension, limb retraction, rotation, or basing. But if we can impose that limb extension on them, then it facilitates our pin, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So would the correct way to think about pinning, maybe, like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but if we could facilitate or impose limb retraction on them, then it would do the same thing. We could rely on that limb retraction being imposed on them to facilitate our pin.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. So like the way I think about using retraction, for example, is in a belly down opponent, like someone who's putting
Mhm.
base points on the floor. So by pulling the elbow back in towards the center, we make them tumble and fall, right? But if they're chest to chest, really getting the limbs away so they can't put them in front of us would be another example. And then we could also retract it too. Like if they're pushing on me, but I can't get under the elbow because it's too narrow, then we can drive it in. So we reduce that pushing force. So again, we're always extending, and contracting the limb. It's just for what effect, right? Different alignments will create different effects when utilizing extension and contraction. You know what I mean? But we're going to be using one of those two things at some degree, at some angle, for some function. Like that's never going to go away. Like you saw Joseph Chen's match; he was using it extensively. Like he was very good at manipulating the elbow positioning, which again enhances his finish rate and his back taking rate.
right.
Yeah, it seems like the difference is because we use the same word extension. One is extension relative to me and you versus extension when it's isolated.
Yeah. Well, so I would say again, the difference there is in position. So you were imposing it on your opponent in one example, and then they're imposing it on you in another. Unless you just shove your arms above your head, that's fine. You're not really imposing it. You're imposing it on yourself. Like, why did you go there?
Right.
But no, let's imagine that all the actions we take are functional, and that everything that's non-functional is just noise in the system, which is fine. And we have to organize outside of that. Again, that's really the difference between like an advanced player and a beginner player, right? Is all there's not a lot of noise for them. All the junk is kind of out. Like they're really efficient at making all their actions go towards their end, where beginners do things that you don't know why they just did it, and that's noise. It's non-functional noise.
Yeah, speaking of noise, sorry, this is off topic from invariance, but internal and external focus of control and what we're thinking while we're doing jujitsu, or if we're thinking, what are your thoughts there?
Listen, this is where we got to jump away from jujitsu, because like this is actually being debated in the scientific sphere now. What is cognition, and what role does it play in controlling movement? This is a real problem. We don't know what that is. When Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," he created an unnecessary dualism, right? Like the stuff of mind and stuff of body. And the entire scientific enterprise for the last few hundred years has been stuck with this Cartesian dualism. And so now we're starting to realize that, coherence is a thing. Like embodiedness is a thing. We're not a mind and a body. We're like a mind, a body, and an environment, like completely intertwined. So what's happening up here, we don't really know. And also too, like there's a recent thing done about monologues. There are some people who think in monologue, like myself. I think in words. I also think in pictures, but my words are way stronger than my pictures. But there's some people who have neither, or one or the other. That's fucking weird. So how does a guy who thinks in pictures is affected by sport versus a guy who thinks in words, or a guy who has neither? Like I have a guy here who doesn't have pictures in his mind. He talks about it. Like, why? The reason I can't do what you show is because I can't see it in my mind when I stop looking at it. So, what is all that? Who fucking knows, man? Like I don't know.
Yeah, it's so tricky. Sometimes I feel like, you can tell when an athlete is like overthinking, where it is having an interference effect, or like the what does Kabir call it? The joysticking, when the coach is on the sideline just yelling what to do. But then there's an interference effect. But sometimes I feel like it happens internally, where the thinking is just taking over and I'm not moving.
Well,
So,
the way
yeah,
I
it's
like to
tricky.
think about this, so that we can manage it in an objective way, so we don't have to really worry about where cognition is seated. We could notice that it's attentional. So where our focus goes is going to affect our performance. So if you're in the middle of something and you're like, I wonder what I had for breakfast, your attention is now changing. And so the information source that you're dealing with now is going to be, and you're not going to be as attuned to it, because now your attention is somewhere else. So let's imagine that you could focus all that attentional energy, whatever that means, on what you're doing. Your performance is going to go up. And so we know that's kind of true, because there've been researchers who show that external states of focus, of attention, enhance performance. So, and this also affects feedback scheduling. It affects the value of verbal information, because they're all attention manipulators. And so when we use feedback, we use our own thoughts, we use these plans, we're inadvertently or advertently affecting our attention, which affects our performance. So we're also learning the limits of that.
Yeah, it reminds me of hearing you yell "good, good" from the
Yeah, yeah.
sidelines. Yeah.
Well, I actually heard that, not good specifically, but I heard that a one way to mark behavior is kind of like you do with the clicker training with dogs. And I'm not calling people dogs, but what I mean is like, I want them to focus on the positives, because there's also some evidence to suggest that the better you feel about something, the more likely you are to like keep in that space or search in that space or exist there. So I tried that, and I removed all negative or all feedback that was adjusting. And I just said good anytime I saw something good. I do it in the room all the time. Good. Way to stay on top. Way to clear the feet. So they know that they did a good thing.
Mhm.
And so again, I don't know at what level that enhances intentionality and attentionality, but it seems to work well. Yeah, I like chatting with you guys. I hope I was able to answer the invariance question. I was hoping I was able to give you some better examples. I know a lot of the stuff I've already said before, but again, I hope it is valuable to you, Josh and Jake. I know your videos are already having success, but I would love to see them have more success, because we need real analysis going on, and not just, you know, he put his foot here, he put his hand here. Like, we need to start talking about the origins of these mechanics, not just the mechanics themselves. I think that's what we're missing in instructionals, and that's what we're missing in videos on analysis. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And like when we were going over the specifics of that Joseph match, I think it kind of just naturally brings about these like sayings that are very helpful when just thinking about given positions. So yeah, hopefully we can do that again in the future. I just saw they actually posted DeAndre's match with Ethan on YouTube. So yeah, I was gonna enter that
painful.
one. I know. I
Fuck.
was gonna say, when you were talking about being mean going for a rear naked choke, I was like, man, yeah, DeAndre was bleeding at the end of that
Yeah,
match.
his
Yeah.
blood was coming out of his mouth. That was a hard
Yeah.
fought match, man. It was a tough one. It was good though. The thing is about athlete weakness is they present in all different ways, and it's the most troubling thing, because as a coach, we're really trying to watch our athletes closely and like, okay, what the hell is going to affect this guy? Because when we get a 2 week call out from a guy like Ethan, not call out, excuse me, we fill a gap in a place against a guy like Ethan Krelestein, but we got to be fucking prepared, man. He's been out there fighting in that submission only circuit, in that super fight, in that high level for quite a while. That's a tough ass opponent. You know what I mean? And so trying to make sure that, we're prepared for that level of guy is something we always have to do. Unfortunately, we learned some lessons out there that changed our training. But fuck, man, that's a hard one. Yeah, Ethan did a great job, man. Stayed on top, held DeAndre down. It's fucking, he did good.
Yeah. No, I'm looking for, I haven't dove too deep into it yet. But I'm planning on doing that later this week. So
Yeah, let me know, because
yeah.
I analyzed the piss out of it. So I know what the problem, or two of the central problems were of the entire match that sort of set the pace of the match,
Gotcha.
and what fatigued D so much. So yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I don't know how comfortable you are sharing all of that, especially in like prep for ADCC, but
Oh, so the thing is like, I'm comfortable with it, because the thing is you can know all the things in the world, but if you can't perform these actions, it's fucking meaningless. DeAndre's matches are all out there for anyone to consume and watch. You could go there and watch all of his weaknesses and strengths and try to game plan for him, but touching a man is different than watching a man. So it's like, you think we're in here like just doing the same old shit? Like, no, man. Once we've realized a mistake, we try to correct it right away. And so we've already been in the process of that for a few weeks. So no, I'm comfortable. Doesn't mean shit to me.
well, what are those few things that you guys are focusing on now in your
So
training?
we already started talking about this, right? So, I think it started off with a mistake. When D got to the single and destabilized Ethan to his hips, he wasn't able to maintain that destabilization. And Ethan got height and ran him over. And that, you see that happen right away. He got higher than D and boom, ran him over, put D on his butt. So D was stuck in entanglements for quite a while. And Ethan kept a very tall and wide stance. Ethan has long limbs. And so he knows that if there's no way that anyone gets to my secondary leg, I'm not going to that floor. And that's exactly what he did. He kept that secondary leg away, and D fought hard for it. He was trying to get to specific tactics that would allow him to put Ethan down. And we were toggling between threat by capturing the toes and rotation towards the secondary leg for, I don't know, a few minutes. And that level of motion under that level of strong base and pressure is fatiguing.
Yeah.
And as we said before, like the guarded position, the main problem is I'm carrying weight. So if you're carrying weight for 5 minutes against a strong player who knows how to apply that weight, it's going to be fatiguing. If you're not able to put them on their hips or hands, you're in trouble. And so we've just been creating new task focuses in games to help enhance our destabilization tactics from belly up positions.
Very cool. Yeah, there was a conversation going on in the Discord of whether or not DeAndre was sick because he got like really tired. And I was like, man, I don't know. Like he was inverting quite a lot, trying to, destabilize Ethan or get to a heel. And Like that's pretty tiring.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I would never take anything away from Ethan. So there's no excuse I'm going to make here now. But understand that every athlete going out there is going out there depending on how they prepared for it with a specific level of readiness. There were some things that affected our readiness for that match, but that's fine. That's what we had to face. And the thing about fighting is you don't know how you're going to show up that day. And so you got to show up with everything you have, and you have to give everything you've got. And if you lose on that day, you lose on that day. Okay. But all we can do as coaches and trainers for the future is to make sure that we hit that level of readiness when we need to perform. So we have to do a better job at that for the next time we get a call out, or next time we get to fill a gap, or for ADCC. So
For sure. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing DeAndre and all your other athletes compete. We'll be following for sure.
cool. Yeah, the guys will be out. All the small squad will be out there at the Open. They're going to do the Open the day before, and then of course
Sweet.
using the big tournament. So hopefully we do some damage.
Yes, sir.
We'll be there in person too, Jake and I.
Yay! Come say hi to me.
Yeah,
For
definitely.
sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great.